Hello, everybody, and welcome to another special and particularly topical edition of Book Passages Conversations with Authors. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. Please remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already to our YouTube channel. It only takes you a couple seconds, but it really helps us out a lot. And also, please remember, this is live right now, so feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. I promise we will get to them probably a little bit more towards the end of the programming after our two speakers have their conversation, but we will get to it. And I think for this event in particular, you're going to have questions. It's very informational and, as I mentioned earlier, topical. Of all the many and pressing issues in the news of late, one of the most surprising and concerning is that of the US experiencing a baby formula shortage. How could this be happening in America? And what are possible solutions moving forward? As I pondered those questions, those and many other questions, I did think about my friend who's our featured guest tonight, Dr. September Williams. Not only because she is a friend, but she is a doctor and she happens to have written a book on milk banking. So I thought she was the perfect person to address some of these concerns. Tonight's featured book, The Elephant in the Room, Bioethical Concerns in Human Milk Banking, makes bioethics look sexy. I'm really curious how that is, and I'm sure she'll let us know. In Dr. Williams' hands, bioethics, some heady science, and public health are broken into bite-sized bits, and everybody can access it and enjoy it. She looks at worries and access breastfeeding and breast milk equity. September Williams is an American physician, writer, bioethicist, and filmmaker. Her work promotes narrative inquiry and bioethics through stories which are diverse, humanitarian, and scientifically imbued. September Williams is also a breastfeeding advocate. In addition to The Elephant in the Room, she is the author of Chasing Mercury, a novel mixing romance, suspense, human rights, and environmental justice. Helping her to steer this discussion, and we're very grateful, is her friend and I think a colleague at one point, Pauline Sakamoto, who has served 25 years as executive director of the Mother's Milk Bank of San Jose. She is internationally recognized innovator in the milk banking spaces, as well pioneering in the movement for donor milk, breastfeeding, and equity in healthcare. With that, I am going to turn it over to her very capable hands. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
You, Paula. I'm laughing because, you know, Pauline and I could go on and on forever and have done.
Yes.
So the reason The Elephant in the Room was called that was because there are some things that become obvious, but they're so obvious that you don't even notice them. When Paula pointed out that, boy, this must be a total mess without formula. And I said to myself, oh, and it was a total mess with formula as well. So basically the inability to breastfeed, Pauline, it is usually caused by sociological factors, which already augment present health disparities down the line. Health disparities deny groups of people disproportionate health and wealth relative to the best available to those folks in their own historical time. So I became involved with breastfeeding by the inability to breastfeed because of my work as a physician. I had basically a week off after my son was born. It was a rigorous period and people were picking up my milk from various broom closets in hospitals and trying to get it to them. And it was very complicated. So The Elephant in the Room, Bioethical Issues in Human Breastfeeding came about because of you, Pauline, because you basically asked for a bioethics consult through your then very capable and outrageous communications director, Sarah Kornfeld, who said, "You're asking these questions, and I know somebody that might help ask them with you." No answers, but help do it. So basically, I would like to set the context by looking at where we are now that is helpful and who's left out. So basically, I need to know when Mother's Milk Bank started, and I want people to know that, and why.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here, September. And I want people to know that you and I go, just deep into a lot of these questions, and really have had a great impact actually in milk banking. So my start in milk banking actually was, let's see, my daughter is 34 years old now. And so I started with the milk bank as a donor, actually one of the few donors at that time in the 80s. And, with a background in public health and nursing, advanced degree, and living in a city that I just moved to San Jose, didn't know anybody, thought I'd get into something that I could truly do. And with my issues with breastfeeding, it just seemed pretty much a sure fit that I would fit somehow in milk banking. So the San Jose Milk Bank is a nonprofit organization. It is the oldest operating milk bank in the United States. So that was in 1974. So it's even before my time. The demand at that time was nil. And what was happening in San Jose was we had a person, just a really incredible woman that was working in tissue banking at Valley Medical Center. And a call came out that there was a child that was failing to thrive preterm, and none of the formulas at that time just really had really bad affect from it. It was just really not a good situation. So she took it upon herself to find human milk. Now in San Francisco, they were just starting a milk bank, and just to develop the standards and to figure out what is safe and it takes a long time to do that. So it took a while, and when I came on board in 85, we thought we were really hot tamales because we sent out 2,000 ounces of milk to a couple of babies in San Jose that were in the NICU, that were fragile and needed help, and they did perfectly well. And then today, we're shipping out close to 900,000 ounces of milk annually. This business just grew. This nonprofit just grew by leaps and bounds. With that growth took a lot of impetus for me and the other milk bankers. There were 5 of us early on in the United States and 1 in Canada. So we're not the squeaky wheel by any means. But we had to develop standards. There was nothing scientific or research based on how to process milk safely. The question was, is human milk really worthwhile at that time to process and provide it to NICU babies? There was no evidence. So we not only during that period had to develop the evidence, we had to develop the procedures. We had to develop mechanisms, which we now call food processing standards and the Human Milk Banking Association standards to record all the data and to look at other tissue banking requirements that really addresses what we were doing. So you're talking about a small group really, and still up to this day there's 31 milk banks under the Human Milk Banking Association of North America, which we are a charter member, obviously. And so it's not a big operation like you would think of blood banking. However, there have been crises, particularly now, there's a crisis that all of a sudden we've been swooped up in the media that, well, you know, why aren't you helping the moms out, kind of thing. And yeah, so there are a lot of interesting things that have gone on for 30 plus years, but we're still doing it.
So so hospitals depend on donor milk to help premature babies?
Yeah, you
And-
know, initially that's what hospitals were using donor milk for. They would order donor milk for preterm infants, and typically in policies in hospitals, we're talking about babies that are 1,500 grams or 1,800 grams. These are the micro preemies that get donor milk. They don't require a lot of milk, and but what we find that clearly in the United States, children in the NICU that are very small like that we would have real problems with necrotizing enterocolitis, which is a devastating disease process for NICU babies. It basically is gangrene of the gut, if you will.
Right.
And these kids in California that have severe NEC, by the time, if they survive and they leave the hospital, you know, they could be $1 million babies right there. So in California, the rates were running about 7 to 5% of the population of NICU babies having NEC. We're able to show if you use donor milk, the percentage of NEC could be 0, actually, in those units. But it definitely drops precipitously when all these babies of this premature size gets donor milk. They're really protected from NEC.
So you have babies that are sick because they're premature, and then they get sick because their gut has not actually developed fully. Are there other people that are not hospitalized now asking for breast milk? And if so, how are you handling those? And I'm asking this particularly because you know, and you can expound on this, that babiness is divided into pieces, right? So you basically have a newborn in the first month of life, and then you kind of have the rest of the year, you're an infant. And that is kind of a key point. What are the recommendations for breastfeeding right now? And I realize recommendations are always fraught. It's not what's ideal, it's what's the minimum acceptable for breastfeeding to help ward off different diseases, develop immune system. So how does that work out when you are a baby's in the NICU and then they go home? What happens next?
Yeah, it's a good question, a very good question. So in San Jose, you know, it's a myth to say we only service NICU babies, because it's not. I mean, for a very long time, you know, it's pretty much our volume of milk that we're able to collect that, you know, over 50% will go to the NICUs or to hospital units, for example, like the cardiac ICU for kids or the surgical ICU for the infants. They are somewhat of our priority. However, 40%, a little over 40% of the milk that we process and distribute goes to families in the home, goes to the infants that are either discharged from the hospital, and mama's milk started up really well in the hospital and she got the baby home, and then their milk is dwindling. Or we see 2-monthers, babies that are home for 2 months, and the mom and the baby are doing the breastfeeding dance just beautifully. And then at 2 months, the baby starts losing weight or blood in the stools, or, you know, something traumatic. And it usually is, you know, the mom will either their milk supply will go down, or the mom starts using formula and they find that the child has an allergy, or actually it's more than an allergy, it's a real horrific sensitivity to the formula, which is based on cow's milk or soy. And then we get a lot of prescriptions for those 2-monthers to say, look, this child is failing to thrive. What the mom is doing is not working. So we want them back on donor. We want them on donor milk.
You have donor milk that extends out into the community as well as in the hospital. So I'm going to ask you kind of what the baby friendly initiative is, because we're talking about babies in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that initiative is something that really starts as the baby is born.
Right.
So can you describe that?
Yeah, Baby Friendly International is an organization that really brought forth policies for hospitals to follow in regards to the standards that WHO, the World Health Organization, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, among others, that we want the hospitals to really work really hard to support the moms, to initiate breastfeeding, get it successful enough so that the mom is armed literally with the information and the know-how to keep her milk supply up. So when she gets discharged, that milk supply will continue to go up with the needs of the baby. And so the Baby Friendly Initiative has things in it like hospitals, you won't use nipples. You won't give babies nipples to suck on, and not let the mother not give the baby cues for milk, right? Or the mother cues that the baby needs to feed.
So babies with pacifiers or bottles.
Right, pacifiers, exactly. And then also that, as you well know, that formula has traditionally been a free source for hospitals. So it's not unusual for hospitals staff to say, well, the baby's crying, the mom's sleeping, we'll just pop off a bottle of formula, let the baby sleep, let the mom sleep, and which then starts a vicious cycle because the baby doesn't wake up for the feeding time, and then the mom doesn't get the stimulation to increase her milk supply. And then there's also hours that the nurses and the staff have to go through education on breastfeeding and support and education. So it's interesting, California is boy, I'll tell you, California is straight up leading the pack in the United States, because the law actually went into place in California that all hospitals have to be baby friendly or the equivalent to that in 2025.
So Baby Friendly is an organization as well as a policy.
Right. So in California. Now, in other states, it's not necessarily a statute or law, but in California, it is. So hospitals either have to be baby friendly or develop their own program that matches what baby friendly recommends, the 10 steps and the steps in the NICU and all that kind of stuff. So it's promulgated really a lot of interest in donor milk, right? Because what has happened in hospitals that the Joint Commission, when they come visit, they're looking at how many babies are breastfeeding, right? And how many are on formula. Now, there are a lot of reasons why women can't breastfeed. We all know those. I mean, we get them. We get them. They're moms that are a double mastectomy, or moms that are on high risk medications that breastfeeding is contraindicated. So we do get mothers like that, and we do try to provide donor milk for their babies, because at least we know from the very beginning it's a great start in life to heal the intestinal tract, to mature it, and develop growth and potential for this infant to succeed. So Baby Friendly is really just really a great program.
So it's become sort of a universal standard here in California for hospitals, and simultaneously to avoid sending the baby's mom home with a couple of cans of formula. Are they still doing that as well? I remember that part.
Well, yeah. I think Baby Friendly it's interesting because Baby Friendly really subjects the hospital. If they're going to use formula or if they're going to provide formula, they have to pay for it. They can't get it free.
Right.
So they have to show that they have to pay, which, hospitals are not interested in that kind of expense.
Right.
Right.
So that's an anti-incentive, even if you were thinking about doing it that way. So I'm leading you down a garden path here. So I'm going to ask you.
You always do.
The next part of the garden path is I want you to describe what the Pump Act is and who gets the most benefit from it.
Okay. The Pump Act, which, by the way, has not been passed, it's still on, I believe, in the Senate, but it passed through the House and it's in the Senate, and we need a lot of people to support this the Pump Act, right? So the Pump Act, it has been long in coming. It's been years. And what it does is provide breastfeeding moms the opportunity to have a space in their workplace and time to pump their milk while employed, and provide that milk to her baby, and take it home and provide it to her baby, and basically have a stash of human milk. So you don't need the formula, right? California, we have that law already. It's already in place in California. Employers know it. There's a fine if an employee says, look, labor, my employer, will not allow me to pump my milk. And physiologically, that causes a lot of problems. I mean, your milk comes in at a certain time, you got to pump, it's routine, you got to, so if an employer says, no, this woman is not only physiologically and probably in pain, but also that she has nothing to spare for her child. Well, the child is not with her. And then also, so in California, the employers have to provide a space that's quiet, and then also a water, a sink for her to, and an electrical plug to plug in her pump, or if she's using a manual pump, but at least a facility where she can pump for comfort or to get enough milk for her infant during the workday.
Is that true for all sizes of workplaces?
Yeah, it is.
So
it is.
You are one employee in a working environment where you work in a small store, you are eligible in the California law to actually be able to evoke the Pump Act.
Right. I mean, if you could imagine, a lot of the complaints that early on when California started this law, there were places like McDonald's and Taco Bell that we had to really get going on it, and there were fines given. There was retail, there were schools and teachers, and there were farm workers. And the employers of the farm workers had to find a way, since they're out in the fields. And when you pass Salinas and, where the agriculture is, you might find these small tents, and those are equipped for the moms to pump, that they have a right to pump. So California is pretty much way ahead of the game, but we want this Pump Act to go federally.
And I think it's important that there are demonstration models in the country as people work through these different things. Now I would like for you to talk a little bit about women, infants, and children, and the criteria for that benefit, which is a nutritional supplementation program for women who I believe that have to be 138% below the poverty line in order to have access to this program, and how the question of breastfeeding might come up with that in relationship to formula.
So the WIC program has been around for quite a while. And, you know, I have to preface this conversation because in California, to understand how big this program is, that pretty much 1 out of 3 women who have children, infants, or are pregnant are enrolled in WIC. We're talking a huge population of women in California. As a matter of fact, there's conversation on a federal level that, and also in California, that says, you know, if you become pregnant, it is one of the major causes of poverty in the United States. Our infrastructure doesn't support being pregnant, having small children. So we'll talk about that later. But the WIC program was there to develop support for food for the mother and child and the children up to 5. And when it initially started, the WIC program, it was highly financed by the formula companies. So there was a unspoken, if you will, give and take that formula companies, you know, we're gonna fund this program. It's wonderful, it's food for, you know, blah, blah, blah. And here is our formula, right? And WIC got a lot of pushback over that. It took a long time to build that pushback, but they got pushback. Today, WIC has one of the really, a really strong breastfeeding education program follow-up. I mean, it's fabulous to think that you're enrolled in WIC, you get the food vouchers to go get the groceries and the nutritious food. You go over there, when you get those, you get an education on breastfeeding. You can talk to a breastfeeding educator to support, to give you some answers to your questions about breastfeeding. Or if you're really having a really difficult time, they do have counselors now. And they have counselors with multiple languages, which is fabulous, right? So they are very active in breastfeeding education, and breastfeeding education, not just initiation of breastfeeding, but also along the timeline when that child is 1 or 1.5, or when the mother decides that she's ready to go back to work, or she's able to go back to work. There is somebody there that she can talk to about her breastfeeding journey.
Now, if the mom is living at 138% below the poverty line and eligible for WIC, what happens when the baby is a year old? And I have to add that optimally, that is not the optimal amount of time for breast milk. You augment it with food, but a year's good, but if you could go a little longer, it would be even better, right?
Yeah.
And women who are wealthy enough to do that can do a little bit better, but a lot of people have to go back to work even to stay at 138% below the poverty line, right?
Right.
So it gets to be this entangled situation. So what happens with the formula companies? Do they still fund WIC?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know to what effect. I do know that federally, as much as I'm telling you, so many mothers are on it, federally funding for WIC is $90 million. Think about it. The formula companies make, 55 billion.
Right.
And so it's just not a real, it's a David and Goliath fight. As you well know, everything in breastfeeding is
So
like
the
that.
formula companies are still supporting WIC financially?
They are. So WIC does have a program where the formula companies have to bid for a contract with them every year.
Okay.
And so yeah, there's a bidding process for it. I don't know the very specifics of it, but there is some amount of alignment still. And, frankly, we know mothers, some of them do need formula. I mean, we can't say only breastfeeding, right?
They go back to work and they live in California, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And those kind of things. So now that we have a situation where over these last 3 months, and so keeping in mind that 3 months in a baby's life is a long time. If that baby is one, it's been a third of its life, where it perhaps has had breast milk, but couldn't get some from elsewhere, whether it be the breast milk bank or a sister in the family who's also nursing, or those sort of community-based activities. So when that happens and the mom has to go back to work or back to whatever situation that she is doing and can't breastfeed beyond 6 months, and the recommendation is that there should be breastfeeding with co-feeding after 6 months, at least, or up to a year, right? So what happens to those babies? Are now getting formula and from WIC, like when they're working part-time, that still has a low wage. How do they then get the formula under normal circumstances?
It's really a tough question because, as you well know, in the WIC program, there's a limit to the amount of formula provided for a child. So we have to go back to the drawing board, because particularly now with this formula crisis, it's an interesting, it throws in a real cog in the wheel, what was developed federally. Because now women, as you said, that were breastfeeding earlier, probably successfully, and now having to go back to work, or the child is 6 months old, they're taking other food sources other than breast milk. And so these moms are going out looking for a substitute for their breast milk, and they're having a hard time finding it, right? And so WIC has had to reevaluate what their position is and the services that they can provide, that the contracting for certain products, if you will, of formula, because of the contracting that they've done now, is exploding.
Because
right. So
the backlog of absence of milk,
right,
few months.
Right. So it's an interesting, it's a very horrific situation. I mean, those of us in America, right, in the US, the assumption it will always be there. I mean,
right.
they built that, the formula companies built that you don't have to worry. We've got cows in the field. I mean, we'll just keep producing formula, right? And so now, and I suspect in other countries, this has happened, in other countries. We're just not used to knee-jerking emergency. We're used to knee-jerking for earthquakes and fires and hurricanes. But when it comes to something like this, we're in territory that no one's ever thought of.
Right now there are, is it 2 major formula companies in the United States?
Pretty much. I mean, they're pretty much, yeah, they're the 2 major ones. I mean,
And
there
one
are
of those
there are
is the one
multiple
that
ones.
went down, and the other one is having to revamp regulations.
Right,
to-
right.
So we're going to Ireland or someplace else to find formula.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
Yeah.
to do that. So you have, so women and their babies can be in this double bind right now.
Oh, absolutely.
How does that affect the milk bank? Or people calling you up and saying, well, I haven't breastfed in 8 months or because
Yeah.
of the formula, but
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. You know, I'm privy to the data, and I've been doing a little bit of research, not enough yet to announce anything, but I think what, you know, I read the stories basically, which I'm interested in, reading the stories, how these moms are coping and how they found us basically, because I think out there in the public, the assumption is we only service NICU babies is, you know, it's out there, but it's a myth, but it's out there. And that insurance companies probably won't cover the donor milk for an older child. And so once again, we're talking about economics, right? The insurance companies aren't covering it.
also
So
insurance companies won't cover the donor milk because the child that they have didn't have necrotizing
enterocolitis, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so it, you know, it's surprising to me that, you know, the way that the federal government works, you know, is to go out and get more milk from other sources, which is an immediate, we think an immediate kind of thing. But essentially, you know, for us, yes, the demand has gone way up. We estimate Jonathan, who's the new ED now, which I'm very happy he's following my, you know, to have a man do milk banking is pretty, you know, it's very California, you know, and the other states milk banks.
He's a feminist, obviously, right?
But anyways, you know, yeah, the requests have gone up about 20% for milk. And what I'm seeing is really, you know, it just breaks my heart because it feeds into what the formula companies have done to women, right? So what I'm seeing, the asks that I'm seeing are from moms who were successfully breastfeeding. And they're so worried because they go to the grocery store and they go to the pharmacies and they don't see the cans. And they're thinking, oh my God, you know, what happens if my milk's not there? Or I think I'm running low, you know, and stress is the worst thing for human milk. It just shuts it down, right? Yeah. So they're calling us saying, could you please help me? Just please help me. I'm just so worried I won't have enough to feed my child. Or the other story is, I breastfed for 3 months, but I thought my child was doing great. So I decided to put him on formula and now I can't find it. And now I don't know if I don't think I can lactate. What do I do? I mean, this is just like a child endangerment situation, which it is, right? And so those are the kinds of things I'm seeing. There are very, very few of them that say, I've always been on formula. I can't find it. Can we switch over to donor milk? So we're trying to fill all the orders, which is really, really a hard job, but we're getting there. It's interesting that during the pandemic, you think, you know, with the pandemic, nobody is breastfeeding. At the beginning, they were told not to breastfeed, right? And then, yeah. And then it was okay to breastfeed. And, you know, I can't fault NIH nobody knew what to do with this. But what was interesting is, and I think this is true, is that many, many working women had to stay home.
Or got to stay home.
Got to stay home.
Right.
You got it.
Right.
And It was an opportunity for them to bond with their child 24/7 and breastfeed. So if I can say anything positive about COVID, I think that's one thing I could say. So we actually, the milk banks in the United States, we were bludgeoned to death with milk. I mean, we couldn't close our freezers, which was, number one, unbelievable during a pandemic, right? That there are well-meaning volunteer women who said, gosh, I got all this milk, my baby's doing great, I'm home with my baby, my freezer's overflowing, I'm gonna call the milk bank and donate. I mean, it's spectacular. It's spectacular.
So there is some milk coming out of the mother's milk banks that actually can be used for babies who were not critically ill at some point in their
Right.
life.
We
Yeah.
had enough. We have enough to
In your
cover.
jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Well, your jurisdiction goes all over the continent, right?
Yeah.
It's you're like Canada, Alaska, you know. It's
Yeah.
So
yeah.
so it would be more dire of a situation in terms of, you know, one of the things that always impressed me was from Kimberly Sayers Aller's
Allers.
book, because which is such a deeply researched book on the big letdown in terms of breastfeeding versus formula. And in that book, she outlines that all of the formula companies' parents were pharmaceutical companies, which is a very interesting thing because it's like mixing a medicine as opposed to, you know, a food.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's keeping a whole bunch of different standards. And of course, coming from my strong progressive / lefty background, right? I'm like, pharmaceutical companies and doctor background are in charge somehow of the food that these babies are getting. But I realized that in the evolution, because I think that prepared baby foods actually have been around since the late 1800s. And that this was sort of that tincture of iodine period, you know, where they were trying different ways to increase the health of people and public health and babies. But I find it very interesting, and my immediate response is suspicion of the baby food companies, right, and the baby formula companies. But I also know, just from being in the community, I live in Oakland, I've lived in lots of places in the world, that people weren't really able to get baby formula in the amounts that they needed if they weren't properly attached to the system. So if you're illegal, right, how do you get your baby formula?
Yeah.
And those things. So people are actually feeding their kids other alternatives if they don't live in close community where there are people that can help nurse. So I'm mentioning this because I feel like women are in a double bind. In California, you can pump at work. In a lot of states, there's no guarantee. So women that don't have fully benefited jobs, right, who are doing maintenance work part-time or those kinds of things, it's sort of like, well, you're only here $5 a day, right? How are we going? And that at the same time, are women who are poorer than the women who can stay at home and pump. Now it's wonderful because people have to be at home more, right? And there's no expectation. So what I'm wondering about is when we look at the requirements, one, who sets the standards and monitors the standards for how we are doing, and what is the target that we want, that we expect over the next couple of years for the number of children who are being breastfed in total or part for a whole year in the United States. Like, my sense, my prejudice is to say that I suspect that, with the exception of some bright spots like Breastfeed LA, okay, that that women of color and poorer women are still behind the curve.
Yeah, yes. I mean, so you're asking me who sets the standards? Well,
Right.
you know,
And who gets to be
AAP and CDC and, you know, the folks are monitoring the breastfeeding rates. And I mean, it's pretty obvious with the data, right, that women who are of color have the most difficult time keeping their breastfeeding intact up to 6 months. There's no question about it. The data is out there. The data is skewed in somewhat for the Asian Pacific Islanders because we look spectacular in the number of women that are breastfeeding, more so than the Caucasian population. And so I'm part of this group. I'm very proud to call them my group. So in California, we've got a very small group of Asian American, Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians that are in the lactation field, whether they work for WIC or they're La Leche League, or they're like me who, you know, old, but interested in, you know,
you call it
helping out. You know, but we did our own research in California, which the data the CDC put out that makes Asians look like we're spectacular, they negated to include California, which California has 30% of the Asian American population in the United States. So that screws everything up. And in fact, the Pacific Islanders have the lowest rate. There are some pockets of Chinese in San Francisco that have lower rates than the African Americans in the South. I mean, it's really, it's just bad data, right? So what's happening on a federal level is that the CDC and each state has their own data collection. Whether it's good or bad or indifferent, they're collecting data. With that data, there is federal funding. I can't say that it's spectacular, but there is federal funding coming in to work with communities, specific communities, to develop the infrastructure within their community, language, their population, their culture, to develop, number one, lactation educators or counselors that could support that community, and to develop the infrastructure to really do the education, whether it's you know, Gracie, who's my the auntie of the group with me, because we're both old. She's retired, but Grace, you know, who has been in WIC for years and years and years, just retired. She, you know, we were looking for federal funding to do a breastfeeding class for Chinese grandmothers,
right.
Because
They will teach.
Well, they will teach, but the biggest problem for the young Chinese, Taiwanese mothers who come out here to work is the culture in China is that the grandmother takes responsibility for the child. And so she tells the mom, scoot, work, we need the money. The child is mine, basically. And so what we're looking into is finding money to develop those classes in hospital settings and the Leche League for grandmothers of the Chinese culture, to teach them that, you know, that's not okay.
Right.
You gotta get them to breastfeed, you know, kind of thing. So there is funding coming down. It's slow, it's not massive, but it's turning the page. What's surprising to me, and you know, we can go through this, but what's surprising to me is that for the donor population in San Jose, the donors who donate, who volunteer their milk, it's a high percentage are Asian Americans. High percentage, which is interesting because we know we have pockets that are not doing well. So
but that's the it's also that down peninsula stuff where there's education and a lot of other stuff that's going on as well.
Yeah.
And so between the tech industry, like it is a pocket of more educated middle class and upper middle class folks.
Right. Right.
If you smaller pocket of very poor people.
Yeah.
So,
but I think, you know, to me, if we do the education, we give the component of culture and language, obviously, but culture and the background, because you know as well as I do, the African American population is steeped in so many negative events that really makes it really difficult for any lactation consultant to get that mom to breastfeed. I mean, literally, we have to understand it. We have to understand the anger and the hurt of history in order to approach this woman. It's very, very difficult. So to me,
without criticizing the circumstances that
absolutely
she find themselves in,
absolutely,
literally impossible.
Yeah.
Impossible in the sense that you need to do the calculus to make it work.
Yeah.
And you don't have the ability to do the calculus because that's not the background that you come from. So one of the things that I want to mention just before we wrap, oh, she's there. Okay.
Yeah.
Are we back?
I came back in because I actually have a couple audience questions and we're going to have to wrap it up. So I thought we could address a couple of those. One of them is probably to both of you. Given the crisis, will milk banks be kind of more appreciated moving forward and sought after, including getting more donors to participate, as well as the government to increase supplemental donations? And I'm going to kind of piggyback that with another one, with the government supplementing, keeping in mind what you spoke about, that marginalized communities are often kind of left out of the equation if money is needed to access these things. So will the banks be, you think, more appreciated, sought after, given more donors and more funding?
That's a good question, Paula.
Several questions packed into one. Sorry.
Into one. You know, it's interesting because, you know, I've been doing it for so long. And I have to tell you that it's interesting where my progress was to go to the federal government, go to the state government, go to Medi-Cal, go to Blue Cross Blue Shield, saying, you know, you really need to do this. You really need to get us as a provider, because sometimes these moms, their babies are back in the hospital. And if you just provide donor milk to them in the home, you don't have to pay for inpatient services. And paying for donor milk is a heck of a lot cheaper than putting the baby back in the hospital. And it's been pretty much the doors closed. I can tell you, during this formula crisis, we have been sought after. Medicaid is like banging on our door saying, hello, yes, you were right, Pauline. You are a benefit of the Medi-Cal program. What do you mean you're not getting paid, right? I mean, we can do so much charitable care. At one point, our San Jose Mother's Milk Bank, 33% of our income was basically Medi-Cal. And it's slowly dwindling down to almost nothing because of the Medi-Cal program. Well, they're willing to come back to make amends. I think the federal government is really very interested in milk banks, which there is a bill, a federal bill that was presented that is an oxymoron. Because of the formula issues, they want the federal government to manage milk banks. So milk banks don't have the same problems as formula companies, which is like, doesn't make any sense, right? So we're the Humbana organization, we're working really hard with the sponsors of the bill to say, you know, I think you've got us mixed up with formula companies. We're not the same. So, but yes, it's interesting. The donor population, we hope it goes up. more women are going back to work, as you can tell from the traffic outside. So our volume is beginning to dwindle. So we're hoping that we're able to keep it rolling. We're thinking that the formula won't be available probably till fall, maybe mid-fall. Yeah.
That's a shame. Well, Pauline, who qualifies as donors? Who are you looking for?
We're looking for mamas that have extra milk, and are willing to donate it. We don't pay for the milk. Our milk, but all of our nonprofits do not pay for the milk. It's volunteer. They can just call us on our 800 number or go to our website, San Jose Milk Bank. And, if there's a screening procedure, we pay for that. We pay for the small blood test as standard by licensing in California, provide bags, provide shipping units. I mean, we try to do everything for them to make it as easy as possible. But yes, we need the help. There's just too much trauma right now.
Well, hopefully people realize now with this happening that hey, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity.
Yeah.
Kind of in the sense like blood. I don't want to misspeak about that, but you can't run out of either one. So
exactly.
In September, we have a question specific to you in your book. I guess we'll end on this. They want to know, when you first wrote the book and got it out there, what was kind of the reaction to it? Like, did people think, well, this is odd? And the whole thing about the elephant in the room. And they also want to know, how did you manage to weave in humor to such a serious medical issue? But they seem to be complimenting. They're just amazed how you managed to make.
Very lucky. We got very lucky. While I was writing the book, just finishing it up, the first mother model hit the runway nursing her baby in Rome. So I was like, yes, the time has come, right? And she just strutted out nursing her baby. And it was a sensation, but it really brought what happened with the elephant in the room. And God bless Marta Johansson, who's done all of my book covers, with this forlorn family looking at this elephant that is sitting there at their breakfast table, and they're trying to figure out what's going on here. Well, what's going on is that it's a complicated combination of beneficence, meaning doing good with what you got, and maybe you don't have all you need. Autonomy, right? Which is what you really want to do in your heart. Like, you want to be a part of your culture, you want to do this, you want to do that. And justice. What will make this child well, better, longer, and all of those things. So when I started looking at all of these things, what I realized is that every major case in bioethics, the major hallmark cases in bioethics, have been about women, with the single exception of the US Public Health Service syphilis study, which was about congenital diseases passed on from parents on to children, right? So I realized that what I needed to do was catalog all of those events that were in the book and just point that out in a number of different ways, that it's like this again and this again. And yes, the hardest hit babies are going to be the poorest babies and the babies of color by this formula crisis, because those babies, a lot of time, I think Paula can note that we're getting babies to the 1 to 3 month point now, right? Mm-hmm. There's another 3 months we'd like them to be breastfeeding alone. Mm-hmm. And then it's supposed to be co-feeding, right? So what we are significantly below what the goal is for the healthiest babies. And it's hard not to laugh, but it's also just perplexing. It's sort of like, you go in the water, you get wet, you get out of the water, and you can get dry. And we're not there yet, but I think the leadership for that has really come out of Mother's Milk Banks, the technologies that they have developed for processing milk, and the body of knowledge that they have carefully documented over these, what is it, Pauline, 30 years?
Oh, yeah. Well, more, actually. I'm older than that. Yeah.
You are not.
Yeah.
You know, it's been so the way that it's funny is that a lot of it's just tongue in cheek. The beginning is kind of dry and didactic, but this series of cases really start, and they are key cases in bioethics. But you look at them and people started telling me, man, did my eyebrow raise when I saw this? Really? Like, seriously? How did they think that was okay? How did they think that it was okay to have a naked woman in a major photograph hanging, a major oil painting of all the giants in medicine who had had 72 different gynecological surgeries to study how fistula work in advanced medicine, right? One slave woman, Wilcox, right? And people look at it and it seems absurd. It seems sad, but there are a lot of things that seem absurd. And one of those things to me is that there are 2 formula companies in the United States. One of them has gone down. The other one is in review of their procedures and policies. And we're in one of the wealthiest nations in the world where we have one of the lowest breastfeeding rates of the wealthiest nations in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the elephant in the room is just that. And every time I turn around, there's another part to it. And this other part right now is how we are highlighting our shortages and our capacity to actually look forward and in advance to actually think about, okay, we've got guidelines, they're federal guidelines. What do you do if you only have 2 formula companies and you don't have enough lactation specialists? In hospitals are doing great, right? But lactation specialists in the community, in the multiple communities who can actually be there, who can be the grandmother with wisdom.
Yeah, and I think give yourself credit, both of you credit for your tireless work in this area. And I'm sure you're both going to be kind of a lot of knocks on the doors and kind of gleaning your knowledge. Thank you so much, Pauline.
Oh, by the way, a portion of my proceeds, if people want to buy this book from Books Passage, will be going to Mother's Milk Bank, San Jose.
Right, and we do have several of these books in, specifically our Corte Madera store, but certainly if you're in San Francisco and you want to get it from our San Francisco store, all it takes is us getting it over there, matter of no time at all. Also, you can order it online and you can give us a call. Our eager booksellers love to promote our local authors, and especially such a topical and vital book as September's book, The Elephant in the Room. Pauline, thank you so much. This will forever live on our YouTube channel. Hopefully people will access it and take advantage of the information you imparted today. Thank you for joining us, both of you. And thank you for the audience for listening and engaging. And we'll see you at the next event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure as always.